Hello and welcome to Quilting with Lori. My name is Lori Dickman. Thank you so much for stopping by today. I am starting a series today on stripping up your scrap stash. If you're anything like me, your scraps can sometimes get out of control. I receive fabric from people who are no longer quilting. They're donating fabric to me. I just tend to end up with lots of fabric, and so I need to be able to use it to make beautiful quilts. I don't want it to sit around my quilt studio. I want to actually use it. So in this series, I'm going to be teaching you some different methods. We're going to start out with some really simple strip techniques where you're going to strip up your stash and make some very simple blocks and quilts. And then we're going to get into some more interesting ones. We're going to be using templates. You're going to learn how to do some foundation piecing, and we're going to be doing some crumb quilts as well. Because once you strip up your scraps, you do always, and once you're quilting, you do always end up with tiny little pieces which are great for crumb quilts. So that will be coming up as well. Many of you are familiar with my speedy solutions to cut and organize your scrap stash. And these are techniques that I teach where you cut up squares in various sizes and values, as well as templates and strips. I use squares, templates, and strips in my scrap stash. So it's important that I have all of that cut and organized. And this book takes you through that process step by step. In fact, there's also a video, a tutorial that goes along with this. So I will link the book, these two books actually, and the corresponding video below, which will teach you how to do that. Because if you want to also get your scrap stash cut up into squares, you can do that as we're going through this stripping up our scrap stash as well. This book here is additional 12 patterns. They're beautiful scrappy patterns using up your squares and your strips to make some beautiful beautiful quilts. And this is a set. I'll have this all linked below in the description box so you can check those videos out as well. So I had mentioned that I receive lots of fabrics from people, and people know that I love to make scrappy quilts, and that's kind of what I'm known for, and therefore I receive a lot of fabrics from people. So here you'll see a box of fabrics that I've received. These are some neutrals, some blues, pinks and burgundies, and lots of greens here. And the first thing you need to do with all of this, obviously, is to get it pressed. So what I have done here is I have taken the time this morning to go through. I've got a lot of the neutrals, some of the pink variations, and then also some of these greens, and I have them all pressed. This morning what I used was magic sizing and steam in my iron. If you have a Mary Ellen's Best Press, or if you have the precision piecing starch, that's great. Whatever you want to use, whatever you have available to you, go ahead and use that. But get everything nicely pressed, and that way it's ready for us to be able to start getting it cut in strips. All right, so all of these pieces, they vary in size. Some of them are smaller pieces like this, some of them are half yard, some of them are fat quarters. Everything is different. If they were all the same size, if your stash is all identical, you could actually stack 2 or 3 of these. I do have them on the fold, and then you could strip it up together, and that helps you to accomplish that much more quickly. But because these are all different various widths and lengths, I'm probably just going to strip each of them individually. And what I like to do when I'm stripping up my stash is to cut some various width. I like to have 1.5, 2, 2.5, and 3-inch widths in my stash. And today I am specifically going to be cutting 1.5, 2, and 2.5 strips. That's what I'm going to be focusing on, because that's what I'm going to be using in these patterns that I'll be showing you. From this first green fabric, I made sure that I squared it up initially, and then I was able to cut 3 1.5-inch strips, and I have 2 2-inch strips. And I'm going to stack these all on the ironing board away from me here so that they're ready to go. And I'm simply going to then go to the next piece of fabric, and here's what I have. I'm going to bring it around here. I'm going to square it up so that it's perfectly squared on one side here, and then I'll start making my cuts. And then as I get over to this end, you know, things are going to be a little unusual there, but it'll still work out. I can still get some strips from that. But I'm going to go ahead and strip up the entire piece. I'll start out with 1.5 inch. I'm going to have more 1.5 inch than I'm going to have 2, and so forth. All right, I have all of this already cut, and it only took me about 15 minutes to accomplish that. I simply used my 6 by 12 ruler, my OmniGrid, and my rotary cutter, and of course the mat, and I cut every single strip. I removed selvages and tossed the selvages, and I have a few little pieces here that were left over that are not wide enough to be a 1.5 inch. So these are going to be crumbs. So I have a crumb bin that is going to go into, and I'll be using that in another session, so you'll be able to see how that's done. Now, the quilt that I'm going to start with is one where we're just going to be putting together a variety of these different sized strips, and then we're going to cut the length of them into 6.5 inch long strips, by as long as you want it to be. I'm going to do a wall quilt, and then I'm going to be appliquing some beautiful scrappy flowers in between the strips of these pinks and pinks, neutrals, and greens. So I kind of have a mess here on my tabletop, but I just wanted to give you an idea of how you can put together your strip sets. I'm pulling pinks and creams and greens, and I'm pulling a variety of sizes. So these are both 1.5 inch wide strips. Then I pulled a 2 inch wide strip, a 1.5, a 2, here's a 1.5, a 2, 2 1.5s. I'm giving it some variety. It just makes it more interesting, and you can make your strip set as long as you want it to be. Once I have my strip set sewn together, I'm going to cut lengths of them in 6.5 inches wide, and that's going to be a long row for me. And between there and the next row, I'm going to have a plain cream fabric on which I'm going to applique some wonderful flowers. And I do have an cut machine. It's a Go machine, and I'm going to use it. Here, let me pull this out so you can see this a little bit better. The plastic is probably not showing through real well. So this is the applique flower that I'm going to use, and I have a bunch of these scraps from a friend. She gave them to me. She has already fused on the back side of all of these, or on many of them, I should say. And since they're already fused, they're going to be perfect for me to lay across some of these parts and pieces and cut out what I need for the applique flowers. And there's a variety of colors here. I'm really excited to use it. It's going to be a very scrappy quilt, but let me proceed with this so you have an idea of what it's going to look like. The first thing I'm going to do, let me move this out of the way, is to get my strip sets sewn together. And let me show you how I'm going to accomplish that. As you cut your stash, if most of your strips are the width of the fabric or very close to the width of the fabric, I would simply sew them all together in strips in that fashion. However, many of mine are short. They're not even, they might be 20 inches long. Some of them might be shorter than that. So it's not going to work as well for me to sew these in that 44-inch width of fabric strip set. Here's what I plan to do. I'm actually going to cut a lot of these into the 6.5 inch length, and then I'm going to put them together in strip sets in that fashion. I think I'll be able to accomplish that much more quickly. So that's my goal, but there's a couple of ways to do this. You can simply, if you're using 44-inch wide fabrics and they're all pretty much the same, definitely sew the entire strip sets together that way and then subcut it. So I've cut those, I've stacked them and cut them into 6.5-inch strips, and there's a variety of different fabrics within each cut. And then I'm just laying them out here in a fashion that pleases me, and they're all 6.5-inch wide. These have to be pressed here. They've got a crease in them. I'm going to go ahead and create a strip set. I believe I'm going to have it be about twice as long as this right here, and that is going to be the height of my set, and it's going to be one row. And then the next row that I'm going to add with this strip set is a plain cream fabric, or it's not actually plain, it's a print cream fabric, and that is what I will use to actually applique the flowers onto. So there'll be a row of these stripes, a row of the applique, a row of the stripes. Just a really simple way to use up strips in your stash. And you can put any combination together. I just chose these greens, pinks, and creams here. There are so many combinations you could put together. You can make it completely scrappy, very bright, whatever you want to do. The sky's the limit. Have fun with it. So I've laid out my strip sets here in rows, and I've taken the bottom two and I've gone to my machine with each of them and sewed them in assembly line fashion. And then what I'll simply do is snip them apart so that they'll each stay in the row that I want them to be in, because that's just how I wanted them to be arranged. One thing I do like to do when I am working with strip sets, I do like to finger press the seams open as I'm working with them. I do that on the bottom. I press it open, and then I'll flip it over and I'll press it on the top as well, so that seam is perfectly flat and pressed open. So that one is ready to go, and I'm going to do that on all of these. I have 5 different stacks of strip sets that I'm working on here at the same time. I will probably just attach a couple of them together to make the height that I need, and I'll just continue making strip sets. But this is how I'm going to proceed with it, and it's just for me, it's a faster and more efficient way to create my strip sets by subcutting the pieces into 6.5-inch subcuts and then arranging them for this particular quilt. But if you, like I said before, if you do have 44-inch wide fabrics that you're using for all of this, then absolutely just cut those sets and then sew them together as one long strip set and then subcut them. That'll make it much quicker for you. I just wanted to point out, once I subcut all of my various sizes, because every single strip was a different size, I got a variety of little pieces left over in different sizes, and these again will become crumbs, and I will use those in my series, the Strip Up Your Stash series, which will include some crumb quilting. So I'm going to put that in a container where I'm saving all my crumbs, and you'll get to see what I'm going to be doing with that later. So now I've got these all pressed, and I'm simply going to grab the next strip or log, if you will, in line, and put them right sides together and get them to my sewing machine, and do that with all of these as I go down the line and just sew them all together in one long line. I'll cut them apart, press the seams open, and start all over again until I have all of these sewn together. So I have finished putting this together so far. I've got 2 rows of stripes, and the stripes that I have put together are 1.5-inch and 2-inch wide stripes, and I varied them. I think it adds more interest if you vary the width and the colors, and I just had fun with the placement, and I'm only making a small one right now for you, but this could certainly be a bed size quilt. I went ahead and cut a 6.5-inch strip of some neutral colored print, and these are also 6.5-inch wide strips, and you can make these strips as long as you wanted to. It could be a larger wall quilt, it could be a lap quilt, it could be a bed-size quilt, whatever you wanted to do with it. It depends on how much scrap stash you are trying to use up. Now what I'm going to do is grab my Applique cutter, and I'm going to create some beautiful vines and flowers here. And these are the pieces that I chose to pull from that scrap stash that I had received from my friend. They have more of a darker undertone to them. So I'm going to cut out and I'll probably use these 5 items right here to be able to accomplish that. I won't have anything large enough to do this big flower, but that's okay. I don't think a large flower like that would work so well. So I'm going to get my Applique machine out here, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to cut those. So I have my Go Cutter all set up here, and as I had mentioned, these are the pieces that I'm going to try and accommodate. This one for the flower, the leaf, these circles, and part of this stem. I won't be able to get the entire stem, but I'll do what I can here. So I'm just going to lay these on here in such a way that I'm covering as much as I can. I'm making these a couple of layers thick. We'll see how that works for me. I think I'm going to put this one over here too. And I'll put these 2 here. And let's see what happens. All right. Here we go. What do you think? Did it cut? Let's find out. Looks like my plastic part here needs to be replaced. Ah, looks good. I got some things here. All right. Let me move them all down here. All right, so I have a leaf here. Here's part of a vine. Here's a couple of little flowers. Here's another leaf. And I have lots of little dots here. And I can actually reuse some of this and continue putting it through. To clean up the mess a little bit, I've got kind of a mess here. Here's another one of these. So this will be fun. I've got a number of things here that I'll be able to use. So I've taken advantage of these leftover pieces from a project from a friend of mine, and I'm going to have fun using them. So I'm going to continue cutting these in my Go Cutter, and then I'll lay it out on the center of this little quilt top, and I'll bring this back to the tabletop so you can see what it's going to look like. I have a lot here to play with. So many fun parts and pieces. So I'm just going to continue playing and figuring out what I want to put on here. I think I have quite a bit on there right now. I don't think I need that much, but some of these parts, they're not actually the flower that were part of the AQ8, but the AQ quilter here. But it was left over, and it looks like a little flower bud, so I can use those as well. I've got leaves, the stems, the circles. I created a little bud with some of these as well. And all of this has the fuse already attached, which is wonderful. So all I have to do is identify where I want it to go, and then I can, once I'm happy with the placement, then I can fuse it down and I can applique all of it on here. I have lots of little circles here too that I can put on the flowers. But this was fun, so I will play more with that and get that finished. But right now I want to go on to another quilt that I can share with you that where we'll be using the strips, and I have many more of these strips that are available in the 1.5 and 2 inch and 2.5 inch width. So let's get on to that so you can see another quilt that you can make with your stripping up your stash. The next block we're going to make, and it makes a beautiful scrappy quilt, is this one. We're going to create strip sets for this center section, and we're going to create little strip sets for these outside sections. And for this block, it's a 6.5 inch block. I've cut, these are all 2-inch wide strips. So I'm going to make a strip set of these 4 fabrics. I want to make sure that they're down here so that you can see what they look like. So I'm going to make a strip set of these 4, and then I will subcut it into 3.5 inch subcuts, which will create this down the center of the block. So that's how I will accomplish that. And then I have my outside sections here. I have them folded right sides together. And so what I'm going to have them even here. And when I subcut these, I'm going to subcut them in 3.5 inch segments. And I'm going to sew them on the ends. Instead of sewing them lengthwise, I'm going to sew them on the ends so that I'm actually sewing the green to the cream, and it will end up like that, which is this. And so that's how you can quickly make the subcuts and the strips for this block. This is a 6.5 inch block. I'm using 2-inch wide by 3.5 inch long. You could do the same thing with your 2.5 inch strips. If you have a lot of 2.5 inch strips in your scrap stash, definitely use those. Everything would be 2.5 inches wide, and your strips would then be cut at 4.5 inches long. You'd follow the same principle here, but instead of it being 2 and 3.5, it would be 2.5 and 4.5 that you're using for measurements. All right, I've sewn this strip set together, and I've squared up the end of it so that it's perfectly straight there. And now I'm going to subcut it into 3.5 inch subcuts, and that creates this center right here. So let me just grab my ruler here, and I've been using this same ruler most of the time that I have been videoing this stripping up your stash episode here, and I think I'm going to get quite a few of these little strip sets out of this. So each of these are 3.5 inches wide. Let's see if I can get one more. Can I or not? Yes, I can. All right, so these are all my strip sets that will be in the center. Now what I'm going to do with this, and these are the 2 that are going to be on the outside as you saw here, I've got them folded right sides together. I am going to subcut them in, again, 3.5 inch subcuts. And then I'm going to sew them together on the short end instead of the long end. Let's see how many I'll get out of this. Will I get one more? Let's see. I think I will. Yes, just. That's another crumb. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is take these 4 to my sewing machine, and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance right there so it opens like that. Let me do that and I'll bring them right back. All right, so I have 4 of these lengthwise strip sets, if you will, and you could put them on here any way you want to, I guess, but I've reversed them so that each side is opposite, and I'm going to sew them to each end here, and then I'll have a 6.5 inch square. It is a great way to use up your strip stash and make a nice, beautiful scrappy quilt. Each of these blocks could be sashed in your quilt, or you could simply put it together, just making sure that you alternated the colors so that it wasn't all repeating. It's kind of pretty just like that. There's so much that you can do with it. Every one of these blocks could be a completely different colorway from your strip stash. I just finished piecing the last 2 here. They do have to be squared up to 6.5 inches, But I laid them here. If I had the fourth one here, that green right here would be going this direction, and that would make kind of a neat little pinwheel in here, and it would make a pretty sort of a braided look, if you will, throughout the quilt. So there's a lot of different possibilities for laying this out. You could just keep them all in a line. Let's see, I guess that would probably be it, like this, and that would be very pretty. You again could put strips of fabric on each side that are just a neutral shade or a dark shade. Neutral can be either light or dark, I guess. And then you could do some applique, or maybe that the strips on each side here could be some beautiful florals that would complement the scraps, the scrappy block that you're putting together. So much you could do with it. I would love to see what you're doing, and comment below. Please let me know how you're going to use this block and what size you're going to use. If you're going to use the 2" by 3.5 inch, or if you're going to use the 2.5 by 4.5 inch when you create these adorable little blocks. Now let's learn the rail fence, or the fence rail. That block has 2 different names, but it's a really easy one too, and it's a great way to make up a quilt very quickly using your strip stash. The rail fence block is another great way to make a quilt very quickly. What I've done here, I'm using 2.5 inch wide strips. So all of these are 2.5 inches wide, and the strip sets are going to be created, and then they're going to be subcut into 6.5 inch lengths, and that's how we'll put the blocks together. What I have done here is I've paired up a light, and in this case it's 2 lights with a dark. Here is a dark with 2 lights. Here is a light with a couple of darks. Here is a dark, or 2 darks with a light, and a light with a couple of darks. So let me kind of move this out of the way so you can see what I'm going to do. I am going to, my sections are not as long as the full width of fabric, so I'm cutting mine in shorter sections. And what I'm going to do here is make a strip set of 3, 2 darks and a light in this case. And then for this one, let me cut it apart. This one is going to be a strip set of 2 darks with a light in the center. This one is going to be pink in the center with a couple of these darks on each side, and as you can see, the lengths of all of these don't match, but that's all right. Those tiny little pieces will be added to my crumbs, and I'll be making crumb quilts with those. So that's another threesome there. Here is another one. This one will go in the center, and let me cut this in half here. So this one's going to be a light around this green. So as you can see, I am simply making some strip sets, and each strip set is going to simply be 3 strips. Each of these strips is 2.5 inches wide, and once I've sewn them together and pressed the seam allowances, I will then subcut into 6.5 inch blocks, and you'll see what that looks like here in just a minute. All right, let me move this out of the way here, and you can see I have finished a strip set, and this is the fence rail. This is just 3 sections to it. You can make these so that there are more than 3, but mine are just going to have 3 sections, and I'm going to straighten up the end over here, and then I'm going to subcut it into 6.5 inch subcuts. So let me get rid of that. There's one. Two. here is 3. I'm getting 3 out of this piece, and that will be used for something else. So here we've got 3 of these split rail, or excuse me, the rail fence block. Very simple, very easy to do. There are so many variations of how you can lay this block out in various colors. You can start in the center and maybe make it into a around the world, where the center is one color and then the surrounding squares are another strip set color, and so forth. And then maybe each colorway around the center just continues to change, maybe in a rainbow. But there's so much you can do with it. It goes together very quickly, as you can see, and it just makes up a wonderful quilt. I've put together 2 different colorways of the rail fence and just laid it out here, and you can see this is just one way you can lay out this block. It can just be so very pretty. You could do it all in the stripes so that it's all following one direction. It could be more of a striped quilt like that. There is just a lot you can do with it, and especially when you're adding more colorways, and I'll be able to do that as I finish the rest of those strip sets that I'm waiting to sew together. But this is a great block, as you can see. I hope that many of you will use these 3 blocks. Fun ones to do. Cutting up your strips, cutting up your stash into strips is a great way to get your stash used up and make beautiful quilts at the same time. So I hope that you've enjoyed this and that you're going to be putting together some wonderful quilts. I hope that I'll see them out on my Facebook page, Quilting with Lori, Scrap Up Your Stash. Please post pictures out there so that we can see what you're working on. This is the end of part 1 of my Strip Up Your Stash series. And in this one, not only did we strip up our stash in different widths of strips, from 1.5 to 2 to 2.5 inches, but we've learned 3 different ways, or 3 different blocks, to put your strips together to make a beautiful quilt. This one, the first one we learned, was just putting together a variety of various sizes of your strips in rows, columns actually, and you can add plain fabric to it. You can applique, you can add a floral fabric here. So much you can do to use up your stash using that technique. We also learned this method. I call it an 8-patch, but some people call it a potato chip block. It's just a fun little block. This block is a 6.5 inch wide block, square, and they're all 3.5 inches wide. They're 2 inches 3.5 inches long, 2 inches wide were the strips that we used, and it creates a beautiful little block, really fun to make, and there's a lot you can do with this. I think it would be fun to make this very, very scrappy from your stash. These are the fence rail blocks. Oh my goodness, they are so easy to make, and how beautiful you can make so many variations of a quilt using these squares. Just a great option. These are 2.5 inches wide, and it makes into a 6.5 inch square. These are 6.5 inches, these are 6.5 inches. I did cut these columns in 6.5 inch widths. And so that's what I've used today. I hope you've enjoyed it. I really would love to see some of your quilts, and I love to hear comments from you all. So in our next series of Strip Up Your Stash, we're going to be cutting some more strips, and I've got some wonderful patterns for you using templates. It's going to be a lot of fun, so be prepared to stop back and learn all about that. But in the meantime, you have your work cut out for you with these 3 techniques right here. I can't wait to see your blocks and your quilts that you're putting together. So until next time, happy quilting.